Hello, survivors, and welcome to First Aid Spray, a Resident Evil podcast by fans for fans. This is episode 48, and in this edition, we dust off the latest tome in S.D. Perry's Chronicles of Biohazard. This is Book Club Resident Evil Underworld. My name is Cy, and joining me on the panel this week, no vampires, no werewolves, and no Kate Beckinsale in sight for this Underworld, but forget all of that, we have Moist Owlet, aka James.
Nice, yes. Hello.
Sneaking behind enemy lines to use their Wi-Fi because talk is hot garbage, it's Fire Button Steve Valance.
There goes that sponsorship deal. Hello.
And waiting in the shadows for his evil scheme to take effect, except replace evil scheme with guest appearance and to take effect with on a very specific episode that he chose. From Nerdmasons, it's Mike Martin.
Hey man, I could suddenly go for a brandy right about now.
Every episode of First Aid Spray is recorded live on our Discord server, so join now to hear the show early and unedited and to become part of our fantastic little community where we discuss life, the universe, and Resident Evil. You can find a link to the server as well as all of our social media profiles at our website, faspraypod.com. It's the support of our listeners that keeps First Aid Spray going, so why not check out our merchandise or our Patreon page. Tiers begin at just $1 a month. Head over to patreon.com/FASprayPod for a full list and a chance to create bonus First Aid Spray content. Housekeeping at the top, some special thank yous. We've got some new patrons recently, so a very big thank you to Legatron, and a very big thank you to Jacob Ramsey, and a thank you to all of our patrons for continuing to show their love and show their support for First Aid Spray. We got some news coming. We got some very Patreon-specific news coming. In the meantime, the Now That's What I Call Survival Horror episode for Resident Evil 0 is still Patreon exclusive, and it probably will be for another month or so at this rate. So if you want to hear us, Sherwin specifically pick his top 10 tracks from that soundtrack, and he and I go through that. It's a great episode, so would recommend doing that. In the meantime, publicly, we dropped a new YouTube video, new lore video. It's been a while. Looking at Umbrella's militia, so that breaks down sort of what we know of the history and the formation and the background and the purpose of the UBCS, aka Carlos, Nikolai, and that kind of group, and the USS, such as Hunk. And also, somewhat unexpectedly, I think, we are now on TikTok. So if you've got the Clock app, search for FA Spray Pod on TikTok and follow us there as well. We've been dropping some podcast highlights and video highlights and stuff like that at the moment. Just looking for a way to use that platform a little bit more in the future. So if you're on TikTok, why not follow us there as well? Let's circle back around to our guest, Mr. Mike Martin. Back in summer 2020, we put together Resident Evil The Beginning, which was our audio drama adaptation of Biohazard The Beginning, aka Resident Evil The Book, which released on YouTube exclusively. If you haven't watched that, by the way, you should absolutely go and seek it out. It's absolutely the most unique thing that's on our channel, I would say. And that wouldn't have come together without Mike and his group over at Nerdmasons. And when we had that kind of collaboration going on, it was always our intent to get Mike on the podcast. And he specifically chose this episode, wanted to talk about this book. We'll probably talk about why that is when we get to it. But in the meantime, I want to go right back. I know we had you on before to talk about sort of how Resident Evil The Beginning came to be. I don't remember if I asked this question, and everyone already knows what I'm going to ask. It's my favorite thing to ask. Mike, what's your first experience with Resident Evil? What game brought you into this series, and what made you fall in love with it?
It's funny. I knew you were going to ask the question, and every story that I hear from people, everybody says the same thing, right? They were at a friend's house, they were at a brother's location, whatever. But when I was in high school, this was in the late 90s, I was at a friend's house, and he said, "You want to play PlayStation?" I was like, "Yeah, sure, totally." And so he pulls out his catalog of games, and Resident Evil was one of the ones that caught my eye. And so we played the game for, 15 or 20 minutes, and just to the point where the dogs jumped through the window, spoiler. And so he ends up going on vacation and asks if I want to borrow his PlayStation. So, of course, I wanted to borrow his PlayStation. I didn't have one at the time. So I take his PlayStation home, and all I did was play Resident Evil the entire time I had it. The trouble is that his PlayStation had a defect where the laser couldn't read the entire disc. So I only got to play the mansion over and over and over, to the point where I was like speed running it. I knew where all the herbs were and all the items and everything. And finally, on the last day before he's coming home, I found out how to fix the laser. So I was able to actually get beyond the mansion, not much further. But shortly thereafter, I ended up going out buying a PlayStation, and Resident Evil was the first game that I ended up buying. So anyway, that was my my introduction.
That's why I asked the question, because you say everyone's story's very similar, but then you get to a certain point where somebody's got something weird like that, or something really unique. It must have been very strange to suddenly be in brand new territory, and like the game must have flipped back onto the scary side again, because you're in a complete unknown situation after getting to know the mansion so well.
It was right when Brad calls in on the radio and you get that static, and then it would just completely shut off. And I was like, "Come on, what does he say? What's going on?" And it was very frustrating to not get beyond that point. But man, it was wild to get through that, get to the caves and the guardhouse, etc.
That's amazing. So yeah, Nerdmasons, obviously a group that we worked with previously, hugely talented bunch of guys. I'll drop obviously a link to Nerdmasons in the podcast description, but is there anything you guys are working on that you can tease us about? Because I know it's been a little bit quiet recently.
Well, this last year was actually very wild. Camo, who did all of the sound effects on the beginning, ended up putting out a movie last year with the Russo brothers. So and that's why we've been quiet.
Awesome.
It was part of their contest. It's called Big City, Little Italy, and he went around to all the little Italies across America, and just talked to local business owners and stuff like that. And it was a really cool documentary. And then I actually published a novel in November, so it's pretty cool that I just got that published, and now here I am talking about S.D. Perry, one of my favorite authors. So
that's awesome. I wish I had asked you that question before coming on air. That's cool. What's the name of the book? Tell us a little bit about it before we move on.
It's called the Cheshire Catastrophe, and it's kind of like Indiana Jones meets Hallmark Channel. I had just got done playing the what the heck is it? The Uncharted series, and right. It has very strong Uncharted vibes from it. So if you like that, by all means, check it out. It's on Amazon.
Awesome. That's super cool. All right, well, let's move on to a rather short version of the Biohazard news.
So, our one piece of news this week is that Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City is now available on demand digitally, and the 4K Steelbook has been revealed.
Yeah, it came out digitally. It was a weird one, wasn't it? Like, right, let's cycle right back. When we talked about the film, it was already kind of like, it's weird because it's only showing in so many places and very few times in some circumstances. It wasn't in cinemas very long. Very soon after, you could rent it online. And as of a few days ago, January the 18th, you can now purchase it online, I believe, digital versions. And the physical release is scheduled for February the 8th. So it's very nearly in homes if you're going to pre-order it or purchase it. It's one of those things where I haven't rewatched it since my one cinema experience. I feel like perhaps I should. There's, a ton of Easter eggs and stuff in there that I perhaps have missed, and I'd be interested in some of the special features and stuff. Mike, how do you feel about it? Did you see Welcome to Raccoon City yet? Are you interested in picking up a copy?
Yeah. So I did go to the movies to see it, and I really want to take my son to see it. Well, not to the movies to see it, but to I want my son to see it because he's a massive Resident Evil fan. Watching the movie felt like I was playing the game on arrange mode. Like they had all the pieces, it just didn't fit together the way I thought it should. But it was enjoyable.
James, any interest in picking up a physical version of this?
Hey, that was nice to hear that somebody else enjoyed the movie. Because I also enjoyed it, but I won't be getting it physical. I don't buy anything physical anymore.
I realize this when I ask it. It's not really something that you tend to do, but
yeah, like I don't have a DVD player. I don't have a Blu-ray player. Like I think the only one I have is on my laptop, and I only use that to watch Aliens. So, like over and over and over again. So okay. I won't get the physical. I do like the look of the Steelbook. I hope it does well, but yeah, physical is kind of on its way out. But that might be a hot take. I'm not sure.
It's one of those things where we're in an era now where people are very selective about these kind of things. And looking at the artwork, and it comes with these like flashy art cards and stuff, like as a collector or whatever, that might be nice to have. I don't buy a lot of physical films, certainly not really at all. But I don't know, it's Resident Evil. I might be kind of interested to own a Blu-ray copy of this, just because, you know, my shelves were already full of Resident Evil, so why not a little bit more? It looks nice. Steve, any interest in this?
I'll finally be able to go and see the film.
That's true.
Does Wesker have a handgun or a flashlight gun on the cover? I'm just curious.
He doesn't have any gun at all, I think, on the cover.
Is it still the flashlight that's like the laser of the gun or what have you has been sawn off?
They've basically cut the gun part out, and he's just got the laser sight, which looks like a really weird torch, and they edited all the blood off. It's a very weird situation. So that's what makes the sort of steelbook even nicer, because it's got the umbrella in front of the RPD artwork rather than this weird bodged version of the poster.
Fair play. Yeah, I'll definitely be picking it up just so I can, say I've seen it.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's weird. I'm just thinking about how they censored that gun, and now I'm thinking of 90s Yu-Gi-Oh! Early 2000s Yu-Gi-Oh! With the invisible guns. But anyway, I feel like I'm going to get sidetracked.
Don't open that one, because I'll start talking about Pokemon censorship. All right.
Oh, it's a donut.
Yeah, that too. All right, to stop ourselves from getting wildly off track, let's get on to the main subject of this podcast, which is a return to book club with Resident Evil Underworld. And now, reading excerpts from S.D. Perry's Resident Evil Underworld, Samantha Morris, aka Peralt, who you can find on Twitter at PeraltIsGaming.
Hang on! John screamed, and Claire pushed her legs against the van wall. Saw David grab hold of Rebecca, Leon snatching at the handle, and the van was screeching, jerking, and bucking like a wild horse, spinning sideways. And Claire actually felt open space beneath the right side of the van as her body was compressed to the left, the back of her neck crunching painfully against the tire well. Oh, hell. David shouted something, but Claire didn't hear it over the squealing brakes, didn't understand until David dove to the right, Rebecca scrambling right next to him. And wham! The van dropped back down to the ground with a terrific bounce, and John seemed to have it under control again. But there was still the piercing screech of locked brakes coming from crash. The explosion of metal and shattering glass behind them was so close that Claire's heart skipped a beat. She turned, looked out of the back with the others, and saw that one of the cars had barreled into a roadside barricade. A barricade they'd probably come within a second or two of bashing into themselves. She caught just a glimpse of a crumpled hood, of broken windows, and a stream of oily smoke. And then the second sedan was blocking her view, shrieking around the corner and continuing the chase. "Sorry about that," John called back to them, sounding anything but. He seemed wired with adrenaline-pumped glee. In the few weeks since she and Leon had joined up with the fugitive ex-stars, she'd discovered that John would make jokes about anything. It was simultaneously his most endearing and most annoying trait. "Everyone all right?" David asked, and Claire nodded, saw Rebecca do the same. "Took a whack, but I'm okay," Leon said, rubbing his arm with a pained expression. "But I don't think..." Bam! Whatever Leon didn't think was cut off by the powerful blast that slammed into the back of the van. Still, most of a block away, the sedan's passenger had fired a shotgun at them, a few inches higher, and the pellets would have come in through the window. "John, change of plan," David called as the van swerved, his cool, authoritative voice rising over the noise of the screaming engines.
So, Resident Evil Underworld, first published apparently in 1999. Again, with all of our book club episodes, it's unfortunate that it's kind of difficult to find very specific kinds of information. I mean, the internet's great for cataloguing certain types of information, but book adaptions of video games in the late 90s, you're not really going to get sales figures and very precise release dates. But apparently, and this is true of the inside of the book, but it was in 99 sometime. Somewhere told me it was May, but also somewhere also told me that City of the Dead came out in May, which is the previous book. So unless she wrote two at once and dumped them both at the same time, I don't know what to believe. But regardless of that, it was released between Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3. This much we can be sure of. It is the final book that, as far as we were aware, that S.T. Perry was first commissioned for. That's the information that we have. 4 books, 2 adaptions and 2 originals. It also makes it the final original story in the series. Mike, I'm going to start off with you because we've all kind of told our first experiences with the S.T. Perry novels in general, but what was your entry to not just the Perryverse, as we like to call it, but specifically this book as well?
So I started with the Umbrella Conspiracy, and I got that shortly after it came out. And I enjoyed it so much that I kept going back to Barnes & Noble like weekly to try and see if any new books had come out, because
Nice.
I think they did come out really close to each other.
Mm.
And specifically Underworld, I got that very shortly after it came out. I just don't remember, exactly which month it came out. But it was very different than the other books that she'd written. And specifically compared to Caliban Cove, it was just a very enjoyable idea that she had, and I really enjoyed the way that the story was written.
You're right. The first book, as far as we know, came out in 98. So that's 4 books in 2 years, regardless of what month they came out in. It's a pretty breakneck speed. We've done 4 of these episodes. This will be the 4th episode of this, and we're still only into the 2nd year, which is funny to think about. Steve, you talked about picking up the books back in the day, but any particular memories of Underworld?
It's struggling to think back then, but I think it was something along the lines of, is this canon? Is it not canon? I don't remember this game. Is it a side game? That level of stupidity from me. Yeah. Other than that, I think it was just a case of like the rest, I just picked them all up as going into Forbidden Planet. So yeah, not the most exciting story other than Steve's stupidity. Shocker.
Again, pre-internet days, you don't actually know what Resident Evil games exist or not, I guess.
Exactly.
There was no Wikipedia. I had this. This is the first time I've touched this one. Same with Caliban Cove. And James, I already know, obviously, this is brand new for you as well. So let's move on to talking about the covers. I have located 4 different cover arts. You can easily Google any of these images, I should think, to talk about. So let's start with the original. Let's talk about the original and the reissue, because I know that's something we've done it multiple times. James, what are your thoughts? We already kind of. I've got a good prediction what your thoughts are going to be comparing the reissue to the original. But these are the 2 English versions at least. So, what are your thoughts on the covers?
So the reissue is the second one you posted, right?
Yes, it's the one that looks like all the other reissues.
yeah. Oh boy. Yeah. So that second issue is trash. But the first one I really like. It kind of gives you a really good idea of, like, it gives me Resistance vibes, which I'm going to go into more later on, right? But
yeah, that's fair actually. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. I would have liked to see a more because it's mentioned like 50 times, a blue shirt on the man in the suit.
It's just about kind of a blue shine. I'll give it that much. But...
you must really like this cover because it's green.
Funnily enough, that's one of my notes. Yeah.
But yeah, this second one, like, you can see what they've tried to do. They're trying to keep consistency, and it's like, I feel like with books, the only consistency is like comics, like volumes in comics. The only consistency you need to keep is the spine of the book. Like, you don't really need like consistency in terms of the cover, and even then, it just looks like they've done a perspective piece in the background, like on GIMP, and then they've slapped Leon and Claire on the front, and it just doesn't look great. It's just...
I hadn't noticed it until this one specifically. But what's even worse about this sort of like city flying by stuff is just the top of it, the way it just kind of ends. like somebody's used a fill tool and it's just kind of like collided with the image in bizarre ways. It doesn't make sense. Yeah, it's terrible, isn't it?
And what does that have to do with the book?
Nothing.
Nothing here tells you anything about the story of the book. Oh, sure, Leon and Claire are in it. But yeah, nothing here says to me Underworld. Like I don't read anything from the cover of this book. And what's this third one? That's a really cool looking one.
We'll get on to we got a couple of other non-English covers to talk about. Let's stick with the classic. I mean, yeah, completely agree with you. The original is best because there's consistency in the original run as well. You know, the titles are all in the same font. You've got this little biohazard triangle with a number in on each book, on each spine. That's as much as you need. I like this. It's got a mix of original art and stuff like that. Steve, how do you feel about how superior the original is to the reissue?
I say, holding the physical one in my hand, I can say under natural light that he's definitely wearing a blue suit.
Let's go.
Just to add to the confusion as to whether that's Trent or Reston. Generally, I think it's a much stronger cover overall for all the reasons we already said. That and it covers. It's probably not one-to-one with what S.D. Perry fully envisions. At least my mental image of this control room is not what's seen here, but I can see what they're going for. Generally, aesthetically pleasing, lots of colour, and as we've said, it's uniform to its other brethren. The second variant, the reissue cover is, as we've already established, hot garbage. Even more so when you think that Volume 3, which was Resident Evil 2, as in City of the Dead, had just zombies on the cover for the renders. And this one's the one with Leon and Claire in their RE2 / Dark Side Chronicles / whatever costumes. I feel like these could have been switched around if this book had something it doesn't, which is zombies.
Yeah, I was going to say that, yeah.
What? I'll never understand this idea that just slapping a render on it will sell it. But then again, we had that with the old box art episodes, didn't we? Where a reissue of a game, particularly in the Japanese territories, normally would just feature the characters front and center. Here's a render, bam, done. They just look a bit naff. Trying not to swear is hard.
Mike, what's your preference? Are you going to change our minds? What's your preference? Do you like the reissue at all, or is your preference with the original release?
Preference is definitely with the original one. I was looking at the cover, and we know that that's supposed to be Reston because of the blue suit on the broken umbrella. But based on the story, you would think that might be Trent on there. But the whole time I'm looking at the cover, I'm looking at these cameras, and I'm like, how the heck did they get that angle? Is it like body cam footage? I mean, look at that Cerberus right under the number 4. Look how close that is. That looks like the video from RE1 where Forrest is getting tune up.
Yeah. No, it's literally just a mix of actual artwork and previous covers, isn't it? Which is fine. Like it's used cleverly enough.
But yeah, in the
even Misty's there.
Yeah.
I would say on the reissue, it's Claire is not exactly a major role in this book, so having her on the cover, I don't know that was the best choice. But it does remind me of the other reissues of either games or if you think about like the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books, they reissued those covers, and those were trash compared to the originals as well.
Yeah, not all that surprising, really, is it? That the more effort went into the originals. Yeah, the only thing that I don't particularly like about the original, and as James pointed out, not just because it's green good, but like it gives it another its own identity compared to the previous releases. Like it's another nice new color scheme, which I do like. But as Steve pointed out, there's a zombie on one of those screens when there's no zombies in the book. And also, are they trying to make some sort of statement about Reston's weight? Because he's standing on this umbrella with all these cracks underneath it. Is that...
You're right.
That was a little bit weird. I know, obviously they're going for sort of a bit more of a thematic thing there, maybe implying Trent, but it looked like a fat joke to me.
He 3-point landed in. That's what happened.
So yeah, if you do a Google for Resident Evil Underworld covers specifically, you can find a couple of other ones, and I found that we talked a little bit about other regions covers in previous episodes, and again we found an Italian version and a Japanese version. Now the Italian version is and again I would say do a Google of these, but this one's fairly self-explanatory. You have, I think that is literally Resident Evil 3 artwork zombie standing in front of a half-transparent umbrella logo. You know, it's fine. It's a similar thing where I think all of the Italian books probably look like this in some form with a different, already pre-existing artwork just plonked in. Again, the question is, why a zombie when there's no zombies in this book at all? But I think we're all probably going to be fairly praiseworthy that Japan, when it finally got the book, had some original artwork on this. Mike, any thoughts on these non-English speaking artworks?
I really like the text in the third one. The typography looks really good. That's about it. The Japanese one, I think, is very accurate to the book. So yeah, I really like that that it's got original artwork in there. That looks really nice.
You get to see John in the background there as well. You actually get to see a visual of what that artist's interpretation. He looks a bit too much like a cross between Tyrell and Morpheus, for how I imagined him. But it's all good. Not Morpheus from The Matrix, not Morpheus D. Duval. Steve, thoughts on the Japanese and Italian covers?
The Italian cover just screams artwork, not final. I mean, just to slap a RE3 CGI zombie. I mean, you've already said, but there's no zombies in it, so it's just rare. I'm guessing they did them all as a full set, and that's just what that got.
Yeah, probably.
And lo and behold, Leon on the cover of a thing called Resident Evil 4.
Yeah.
Shocker. No, honestly, I think it looks fantastic, and the fact that, as has been said, we get a little bit of a view of John, who I would argue is perhaps the most central of the protagonists in this one. If not he's he's more so than certain characters who we'll get into, I'm sure.
Interesting.
Yeah, solid. Like it. Where's that manhwa adaptation that's all like over the top and someone goes Super Saiyan, etc., etc.
James, any thoughts on these non-English covers?
Yeah, not much more needs to be said about the third one. The typeface is nice, but that's about it really. Because again, it doesn't tell you what's in the book. But this fourth one, man, they should put this Leon in games. Look at this Leon, I love him. But yeah, I love this. That's a piece of art that you'd stick on your wall. You know, It's really nice, and yeah, again, lovely to see John in the back there. Because I agree with Steve, he's such an integral part of this game, of this book. I would have liked him because I feel like SD Perry might have been in love with John a little bit because, she went real hard on his muscles and everything. Just like he's a big boy, and it would have been nice to see more of that. But yeah, otherwise, this cover's beautiful. I love it.
Cool. Right, well, let's move from the cover to the inside of the book. Let's talk about the plot sort of setup of Resident Evil Underworld, which takes place after the events of Raccoon City, which is interesting in that, again, and S.T. Perry really is only working with the information that she's been given in games up to that point, which we know a hell of a lot more about the Raccoon City incident since. But in '99, she's just sort of bouncing off that as best she can. So in her version of events, which is quite interesting, there's reports that the Raccoon City incident was really just a bunch of fires that tore through the town, and Stars and Chief Irons, I think perhaps most interesting, is sort of implicated in an accidental spill of chemicals. And Umbrella basically sells them out to protect themselves, which I think is really clever, obviously, with Irons being on their payroll. I actually really, again, I love some of the ideas that she comes up with, given the time period that this was written in. She really does kind of think logically about where the series could have gone, or sort of the reactions that certain characters would have had in that example. But basically, we have all the characters, bar Chris, Jill, and Barry, who have already left. But everyone heading towards Europe to take down, it's up to us to take out Umbrella. We encounter Trent, who basically says, you need to go to Southwest America to an underground lab in the salt flats of Utah to find Umbrella's little black book for a bunch of information that could basically cripple them. And that is the plot setup. So, Mike, I'm going to start with you because you very specifically wanted to come on and talk about Underworld. So I have to assume that you're a fan of, either you're a fan of it or you absolutely hate it, I guess. How do you feel about the sort of, without really getting deep into the weeds of the resolutions and stuff, how do you feel about the plot setup of the book?
I really love the setup of, it's an underground lair which we had never heard of before in Resident Evil, and
Or since.
but that it hasn't yet gone online, and this is their opportunity to really get something valuable, and they have to strike now or they're not going to. So the argument that that Trent makes, I thought was pretty valid in getting them to turn the plane around. Up until this point, we'd heard Trent as the Perry's original character, and I wasn't sure what was going to happen with this character. I didn't really like him from the beginning in Umbrella Conspiracy, where he's giving out maps and whatnot. But I started to understand that character a little bit more, so I thought Perry did a good job with that.
Yeah, I certainly didn't expect him to kind of show up in the way that he did early in the book and just sort of present himself in front of characters, because from what I heard about him being sort of this like mysterious Deus Ex Machina kind of thing, I was like, well, that's kind of what's going to happen in every book, what we've had so far, just a little bit of background tinkering. But yeah, him just kind of, just appearing in front of everyone and being like, hey guys, you should go do this, and then, magically disappearing afterwards was kind of interesting. And obviously we get a lot more than that towards the end of the book. Steve, how do you feel about the plot setup of Underworld?
I like how it's a bit in media res, isn't it? Because the second that you've gone past the little prologue news clippings, they're in a car chase being hunted by, some Umbrella mercs or the police on a payroll or whatever, and it's a bit pacey. And then obviously you have the plane ride with the magician that is Mr. Trent. I thought it was okay. It felt almost like somewhere between a Charlie's Angels style spy thing or a heist being planned. And the fact that it seemed that the characters were still true to themselves, I could like hear the 90s renditions of, say, Leon and Claire, and especially the fact that just hearing the inner thoughts of John wanting to rip this mysterious man in a suit in half was kind of funny. Maybe it's just my predilection towards violence. I don't know, but no, generally I think it was okay. I thought it was all right. I do feel that it probably could have done with a bit more of a build-up. Because it essentially is just Trent goes, so there's this black book you need, and it's down here, so you're not going to Europe. And they, after like a moment's deliberation, they go for it. But yeah, it's okay. It just feels like there could have been a bit more to it there.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That not that there was anything wrong with it. I thought it was quite a well-written scene, but the car chase at the beginning actually made me immediately think of Resident Evil Retribution. Which was not what I wanted. I'll say that much. Give me a little bit of the shivers there. But after that, you're right. This sort of like real introduction. I don't think it was a thing in Caliban Cove. Actually, it might have been. But the talk of White Umbrella, which is sort of like the ultimate big bad, the real big bad, the worst part of Umbrella. Which again, sort of referring back to what I was saying about S.G. Perry working from information from the games. For people out there who perhaps don't know, White Umbrella isn't actually a thing. That is a mistranslation from Resident Evil 1, where a file with mail from the chief of security, I think it is, ends with, as it's come from someone called White Umbrella, which is just a mistranslation. But S.G. Perry saw that and kind of built this idea upon it, which is, again, props to her. I kind of like that. James, how do you feel about sort of the opening of Underworld?
I really liked the opening. There was a lot going on. The police chase was great. I really liked the pacing of the beginning. Like it really laid out a lot of the story for you, and I didn't like the contrived like Trent turning up, and then it gave me like Don't Hate Me Internet Death Note vibes, where it's like this is where I am now because reasons, and now I'm gone because reasons, But it was, I didn't look into that too much, and I really liked the entry of Trent. Creeped me the hell out. Like when he's like he walks in and like he has this, because the way she describes it, this grin on his face as he's moving through the plane, and everybody in the plane just looks at him like, and they have some kind of respect for him, like, but it's like almost a fear other than John, but like it's God, that scared me a lot, but. I liked the beginning. It was cool. I liked like them going towards the base and stuff, which I think is still the beginning-ish.
Yeah.
It takes them a bit to get there, but that we also filled in like so much between those points, like so much that was happening prior, and like the current mindsets of the characters, which was really important after what just happened. It's really important to me because I want to know what happened after Raccoon City,
Right.
like and how the characters felt, and we got a little bit of insight into that. Yeah, and then after Caliban Cove as well. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the beginning.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've definitely got some things to say when we talk about characters, but you're right. Like pacing wise, there we go, boom, in with this car chase, and then we actually get some sort of catching up to speed with these characters and sort of their mindsets and stuff. And then then we get into towards the base, which gets a little bit odd. I felt like it felt a bit more like a Splinter Cell book than a Resident Evil book, because there isn't a single B.O.W. until halfway through the book, which is odd. And I think that again, we talked about how this is 4 books in 2 years. I imagine it was pretty much just start writing, finish writing, kind of send it to editor, go. I can't imagine these would, and I'm just assuming here, so I may be way off mark. I can't imagine these went through multiple revisions and drafts. And I think that whilst you're right about the beginning of the book affording time for characterization and stuff, it did start to really sort of trudge a bit slowly by the halfway point till we got really into the planet, which is the name of this sort of test area in the underground lab. These sort of 4 sections, artificially created sort of jungles and deserts and a city, etc. That's when the book really picked up and got me. But it did start to trudge before that, considering it was just. Yeah, I'm reading a Resident Evil book. I want some monsters. Like, I don't want really I'm not too bothered about them taking out a bunch of military dudes standing around a base, but maybe that was just me.
I kind of liked it though. Like,
I mean, that's fair.
I think it's because like I think it's because of the other books I've been reading as well, like human stories and stuff. Like, but at the same time, like the previous books were nothing but zombies and like B.O.W.s and stuff. So it was kind of nice to have that that beginning. But at the same time, I do have my problems with that beginning. Like, I don't like the split. I don't like that was done with what was done with the split. But we'll get into more of that later on.
Okay, well, let's just sort of blow it wide open and just start talking about the story now, I guess. Parts people liked and didn't like. About, I guess we'll start with the planet. Mike, what's your thoughts on the lab and the sort of setup of the premise of this sort of like segmented part with all these artificial test chambers that Leon and John wind up going through? And what did you like and didn't you like about that?
Well, I definitely agree with the split. That was the part that I have the most issue with. It made sense just not to have them be separated for the majority of the book. So having David, Claire, and Rebecca up on the surface, just they felt like they were just wasting time until there was a conclusion to the book. But it's funny, Si, you said Resident Evil Retribution. Right around chapter 5, I started getting that uneasy feeling, and I was like, uh-oh, this is starting to feel like Resident Evil Retribution. And thankfully, it didn't go that same route. I think that the lab part down in the planet was the best part of the book, and it kind of offset the split issue that I had.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Once the action actually got going. But you're right, like out of those 2 separate, you're all completely right with that. Like out of those 2 separations, there was one I was heavily more interested in, than the other. How did you feel about that, Steve? The sort of separation of characters whilst we're on it.
Yeah, it was the inside the lab with John and Leon was, no offense to David, who I still love as a character, Claire and Rebecca. It felt like the real story. We've already covered this, but like the top side does feel like they're just basically playing Metal Gear Solid with a few umbrella guards until the plot demands they go back down. Inside the planet, I'm kind of tainted in a way because I've played Parasite Eve 2, and a big thrust of that is an underground Eden Project, like biolab style thing, where they do this kind of setup where they have different environments. So unfortunately, I'm seeing that in my mental images. But it's still cool because I can still just play the Crystal Maze theme whenever John and Leon's chapters are playing, and it works. Jay Reston being the evil Richard O'Brien.
That's
Sorry.
how I'm going to picture him now.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a point in the upper, in the top side story where they're hiding on top of some boxes in basically a storage shed, and they just fall over when some umbrella guards come in, and Rebecca gets a concussion, and that's like her entire character from the rest of the book onwards. It's kind of a bit. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. And David just seems a bit lost and aloof compared to his overly tactical self in Caliban Cove.
You know what?
Or Caliban. I don't even know.
I think that is a perfect time to take it back to James to ask about how you felt about the uses of the characters in the splits, since you're the one that brought it up. And I guess Rebecca's role in the story, actually, maybe that's a factor.
Oh man, I hated it. Man, how could they do my girl like that? Like, we know that she's capable. Like, I mean, I did feel for her, and it was well written, and I wanted her to do well, and I know that somebody needed to take the bullet, but did it really need to be Rebecca Chambers? The one in Resident Evil 1 who is just basically a side character. And they do it again in this one, and it's, Caliban Cove even, she still is, it would just be nice for her to be, I know she is in Resident Evil 0, but I would just like a little bit more respect given to that character. In terms of the split, yeah, it was just so weird, because it was, I every time a chapter came by and it was David and Claire and Rebecca, I was like, ugh.
Yep, I felt the same way.
Yeah, just let me go back. Or let them go down there. I get the for drama, I get the split. The same as yourself, Evil. I get the split, but let it only happen for a couple of chapters and then bring them down there and let them join forces. Not do it in the last 2 chapters of the book. No, it was 3 chapters, I think. But it just felt silly to do that, because I didn't care about what was happening on the surface. And to be honest, it didn't feel like SD Perry cared much, because there was some really silly decisions that were being made by which faction was it? That was the military faction that was coming in for them.
Maybe USS or something
USS. But they were just making really silly decisions. Leaving, they knew they were still there. These folks had just completely trashed their entire squad. And then the commander is like, "Oh yeah, we're just gonna go home. I'm gonna leave 3 people here. By the way, don't worry about it. It's gonna be fine. They're gonna be fine." Yeah, I didn't care for the top the surface level stuff at all. It was nice to see David, because David did do some cool tactical stuff, like the thing with the door. Claire was literally a nothing character, which I think was awful, considering how much of a badass she is.
She got an evil chapter where she dupes a security guard and gets smashed around the head.
True.
I did laugh. I did audibly laugh when I read that. I remember. Yeah.
And then Rebecca is just, she's the, she's the injured damsel. It's ugh. I didn't like it.
Yeah.
But I much preferred the stuff underground. Much preferred that. It was really good.
The Rebecca
Steve,
thing's
you
weird.
just said.
Oh, go ahead.
The Andrew Killer Berman section was fantastic. I laughed so hard at that, and it was such a refreshing scene, because everything else that happened on the surface was just a trudge to get through. It was awful.
Right. It doesn't help when you literally plot out what the team on the top actually did in your head was, hide, get injured, run away from the guards, wait a bit, come back. That's basically all they did. And it was there's not much of an actual plot there, is there? You could have done all that in 2 chapters and then actually had them do something. I agree. It would have been really cool if maybe they found alternative entrance and kind of come at the planet from the other side, and they wind up meeting in the middle, these two teams or something. Rebecca's an interesting one because the book, it starts, one of the earliest things in the book, one of the earliest notes that I wrote was there's repeated references to how Rebecca is the most experienced person of the group when it comes to dealing with Umbrella because of Umbrella Conspiracy and Caliban Cove. And, you know, how right you are and you don't even know it, S.T. Perry, because Resident Evil 0 hasn't happened yet. But then, and she does sort of continue to be this focal point of the series, and you can tell that S.T. Perry cares about the character and that kind of thing. But then it's really weird that she spends the rest of the book just kind of wounded and not really doing much, which is, yeah, it's a shame.
She still gets the W at the end, though. Yeah. Like, you know, pickpocketing Reston while dealing with a heavy concussion. In her defense, and I know the top side stuff we're being a bit harsh on, but the way that Rebecca is, like, she's concussed, she's been shot, and she's trying to trying to tot up all of her injuries in her head to then explain to the guys how to take care of her. I thought was kind of cool. Like, she's trying to, like, oh God, have I been crippled? Am I not going to be able to walk again and stuff like that? Admittedly, 10 minutes later after a power nap, and she's like back at least on her legs. But that stuff I thought was like, oh God, would they go that far as to write off a character permanently?
You see, I thought that's what they were going to do. I thought they were going to leave, or they were going to, like, Claire was going to be left with Rebecca Chambers, and then, like, Claire and Rebecca, after, say, an hour or so, were going to come back. Like, and then, like, Dave was going to do his thing, and then they're going to come back, right? And then there was going to be, like, some, like, really cool, like, duo, you know, these badass women just coming in and, like, kicking butt. But yeah, we didn't get that. She just miraculously was okay again because magic.
Yeah, the first aid spray.
Yeah, that's all that she needed, really. Okay, well, in that case, as you guys are kind of know, we have kind of talked negatively about that enough. I think perhaps we talk about the thing that the half of the story that we all kind of agreed was the better half then, which is the planet, this sort of segmented test grounds that Leon and John find themselves trapped in with a new character called Henry Cole, who is contracted or employed by Umbrella. I think it might be contracted, but I'm not sure if it's actually, you know, really specified. But basically, he's just there to do some electrical work. He's there to sort out some cameras for the tests and finish hooking up the audio. And then he just winds up a part of this, which, as a concept, is actually awesome. Because when you think Umbrella, you think of scientists laughing like maniacs and men in suits, like the guy who may or may not be Reston on the front of the book cover with dollar signs in his eyes, and, you know, military factions and stuff. But Umbrella would have had contract workers and builders and electricians and plumbers and engineers, and, you know, Umbrella Labs would have had maintenance teams with janitors who clean the toilets and stuff. But you don't think about that. You just think about the scientists, the suits, and the military. So that was really a really cool perspective to have as someone who's just kind of like just there to do just a routine electrical job, and then just winds up fighting for his life. And actually, probably, for my money, and we'll get to characters really later, but having one of the best arcs of the book, if not the best arc of the book. Yeah, it was really cool. Steve, take us away. Thoughts on the planet and the interactions and the fights and stuff therein?
It starts out almost too easy. Despite the fact they've been separated, they managed to, like, round up 90% of the staff, and then it all goes slowly more and more awry. And then Reston basically clocks them ahead of time, realizes they're here to get him, and dupes Henry. And poor Henry, who didn't realize, but his middle name was Redshirt, had to lure them in. And it's really charming that he goes from, oh great, so I was trying to do my boss a solid, and it turns out it's trying to kill me. Oh, these guys are going to kill me then. Oh, they're not. Sad. I'm with you guys. It's such a, well, yeah, if you're going to screw me over, I'll screw you over right back. And he's basically their eyes into the world of it all, isn't he? He's the one who explains, like, what these biospheres, or whatever, you know, football field biomes are for. And then his dying breath is basically, don't forget to unleash Fossil, it'll wreck the place. Which is awesome. You know, it's definitely a way of, like, sticking it to your boss. I just feel kind of bad for him because, like, as we've said, he is literally just a dude doing a job. He's not an evil scientist. He's just a person who's like, oh, that umbrella stuff seems dodgy. Oh, here's the boss, and then it all kicks off. I especially like that in the brief time that the rest of the umbrella staff were locked in that cafeteria, they've apparently started a union because the second Reston tries any of his stuff with them, they just go, nah, boss, we quit, and leave. At least I hope they leave, because they could have been eaten by a fossil. You don't really know what happens to them afterwards.
Yeah, that's true. Mike, thoughts on Henry Cole and the planet and all that stuff?
Yeah, you guys already said it. I think that it was awesome to see that, in the beginning, Trent mentions that there's different sections of Umbrella, and that leads, I think, directly to there being, trade people that are working here, especially on the planet that's not even up and running yet. So they're going to have those people in here doing the work. And I thought Cole's portrayal was really nice. And then when they go into the first phase and they give him a gun and he doesn't really know what he's doing, I thought that added a lot of personality to that character. And towards the end, you took my thunder there. Nick Frewer says, who says we get out of here, after Reston's epic speech that nobody's listening to. I thought that was really cool.
It's a proper Cartman, screw you guys, and going home. It's like...
James, what's your thoughts on the concept of Henry Cole?
Oh man, I love this man. He's great. He John might be the hero of the story, but he's like the linchpin. He keeps it all together. Like this man, and I didn't think I'd care about him. Like I thought seriously when Reston was like, here's my plan, by the way, Cole was a little bit silly to take him up on it, but the way he just replies to him, like, yeah, okay, yeah, sure, whatever, boss, right? It's like, it was so human. It was like, I got it. And to talk about like human side of it, I love SD Perry could have gone wild with the workers. She could have gone wild with them, but she didn't. She made it a very human experience. Like, where it's like they're just all, John and Leon went around the place and they didn't mess around. They just, they piled them all up in that cafeteria and then they just stayed there because, literally it was like, we don't get paid enough for this. We're going to sit here, you tell us what to do, and then Reston comes in and says his thing, and it was so funny, but so human. I could relate so hard. But yeah, I love the world idea, like the world element that was added to this, because that's when really the book started to really amp up.
Yes,
I just couldn't put down the book. I was constantly reading to see how they were going to do it. There were some bits that were a little bit too, a little bit too wild to believe, which is why I feel like, I know I'm going back on a point, but why I feel like having Claire, Rebecca, and David there would have been made much more sense, because it just would have made the scenes more believable. But seeing John kick butt was great.
Yeah,
Leon, Leon did Leon things. He knows how to use. What did he have his weapon?
He's got a BP-70 handgun. And he knows how to use it. That's about it. John's got hand grenades, M16s, just pure rage.
John knows how to cook grenades. Let's just say that. This guy is a beast. I love him. Are we talking about B.O.W.s now? Or are we talking about that later?
We'll get to that definitely. We'll do a whole section on them because there's enough originality there. We can talk about them certainly.
All right.
One of probably the best bit of the book for me, actually, this is weird to think about this, but the two characters that it involves are original characters, like no pre-existing video game characters. And it's the moment with the bridge where it's such a standard, everything's done at little rickety wooden bridge that splits at one end and dangles off a cliff with John hanging onto it, while these B.O.W.s are spitting acid at him, essentially. And Henry Cole, who's gone from, I wouldn't say a coward, but completely thrown in at the deep end and not combat prepared whatsoever, wraps a shirt around his head and helps John up and all this. And afterwards, John describes him as looking like a mad turtle and calling him a funny guy. I felt actual glee that John didn't die and that those characters got to share that moment, and you felt sort of like the respect that, you know, big badass combat guy John was feeling for this random electrician dude. If anything, I'm going to make a reference, and not everyone will get, but James, you'll appreciate this. It very much reminded me of Amos and Prax.
Yes.
One is this big burly badass, but he's got a bit of a, you know, he's warm-hearted. Let's put it that way. And then there's this guy completely out of his element, but he's doing his best. And I felt exactly the same feelings for those characters that I did for those characters from The Expanse. Beyond that, yes, we have Fossil, Leon, and John, who decide, lol, let's release a giant T-Rex to destroy the facility, rather than find the self-destruct button that it definitely has, because it's Umbrella, because you got to have one. And then they basically screw themselves over by putting themselves in harm's way of it later, which is pretty funny. Any final thoughts? I guess we'll move up, you know, talk about writing style and characters and stuff like that. Any final thoughts on the plot? And I guess obviously we want to talk about the epilogue. Mike, anywhere you want to take us?
Yeah, there were two things that I really enjoyed. When they first get down the elevator, and Leon is basically still, you know, like a rookie cop, and he lets John take the lead, which is all too happy to follow. I thought that was a great detail, because he's not this battle-hardened, you know, warrior yet. He's still just only a couple days after Raccoon City, so I thought that was a great detail. I really loved the character of Reston. He's just such a goofy bad guy, and he's drinking his brandy in his office, and I mean, every few chapters he's taken another few swigs, so this guy must have been hammered by the end of the book. So there were some things that he coincidentally forgot, and then I was like, well, I mean, this guy put away you know, half a bottle of brandy, so maybe that's why he forgot a couple of elevators. But I really enjoyed the not too serious character of Reston. And thinking about it, there was a detail where he just got to the planet recently. There was somebody that was supposed to be there who met an untimely demise. So all of these workers have probably no idea who he is, which makes sense as to why they're not going to follow him after that speech that he gives in the cafeteria. So I thought that was a nice detail.
Yeah, there's lots of those kind of things sprinkled in there. I've got a few definitely to get to when we get to characters. Steve, any more thoughts on plot?
The fact that they do a Barry Burton on Unleashed, the tyrant dinosaur monster, and they even have second thoughts when they think time's running out, and then flick to the cameras and think it's thrashing around, it's too late, and there's something there's almost a Red Dwarf vibe to some of the story. I swear, like I can see Reston as somewhere between Ricardo Irving and Arnold Rimmer, you know. So it's very, the slapstick in the plot helps it a lot for me. And I know we haven't really talked about the tests themselves, how basically one rookie cop, one SWAT guy, and a janitor managed to like nuke the entire Umbrella test. It's pretty fun. Honestly, pretty good. The only thing that it's when the test is over and Fossil is about to be unleashed, and then lo and behold, the topside crew re-enter the main plot. It kind of feels like it kind of chugs a bit until Fossil starts wrecking things. Like the whole capture of Rebecca, even though she gets the W in the end by Reston, seems a bit like how do you lose one person amidst five, and he manages to get away without it being stopped? It's a bit.
I would agree with that.
But then again, you've also got Aqua Teen Hunger Force Strike Team leaving. Like, nah, boss, we quit. The comedy I think is stronger in this book than it really has any right to be and get away with, but it does. For this plot. What else? I mean, like Mike's already rightly said, the fact the main villain gets very noticeably intoxicated, not even 3/4 of the way through the book, is amazing.
I love that so much. Yeah, complete agreement. James, any more final thoughts on the plot? And feel free to take us into the epilogue if you've got any thoughts.
I thought they really the releasing Fossil was dumb. Like, it was the dumbest decision. Like, when they said they were going to do it, like, especially after 2 days after what happened in Raccoon City, they knew what happened in Raccoon City, and they still released Fossil. Like, this huge thing. I don't understand why that was done, but it was so funny, like, that it actually happened, and then it kind of bit them in the butt later on, and, I love the, I mean, it's typical fare. It's a trope, but, Fossil ate, Reston, and that
Of
was
course.
like, it had to happen. That scene, by the way, brutal. Like the way she described it. Ugh.
Mm.
Like it was, I felt that, and I was just like, oh, that's disgusting, but great. Yeah, then we learn about like who Trent is. Like absolutely wild. Like
Yeah, I really was not expecting it.
yeah, I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to wait at least another 2 books, like to learn who Trent is and like what their connection is here. But yeah, we learned that Trent is basically the son of the one of the first people who messed with well, not the virus, but it was initially meant to be like a pharmaceutical. It's meant to be a medicinal, like to help people, and like basically Umbrella shoved him. His name was Dr. Darius, right? And his wife.
James Trenton Darius.
Yeah, I mean his dad, his dad's name.
Yeah, no, that is his dad's
Oh, okay,
name.
cool. Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought that was his name. But yeah,
Trent's real name is Victor. Victor Darius.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, and we learned that basically his family was done over because Umbrella and capitalist greed, and this is Trent's last hurrah, his revenge, like against them, is him being this shadowy figure that is apparently in the upper echelons of Umbrella, or White Umbrella. That I wasn't expecting either. I knew he would be involved with Umbrella in some kind, but I didn't expect him to be so high. Because Reston talks about him, like being somebody like a peer, like somebody like is on equal like grounds with. Like, oh man, I'm very interested to see where this goes with Trent. Very interested.
I wonder now, obviously, I don't know if we're going to get much more of it because I feel like this epilogue is here because S.D. Perry thought I might not get any more books. Part of my deal was 4, and that's why we got it suddenly. I'm with you, like, I really wasn't expecting it. I loved the little, just sort of thrown in randomly in the book. Oh, yeah, he's part of Umbrella and he's kind of part of White Umbrella and he's important and all this. I was like, that was nice. They just throw that in there for you to catch. And then the epilogue, yeah, just gave us the whole backstory, which is a decent enough backstory. It reminded me a little bit of the Anderson movies, perhaps. The original purpose for what became the T-Virus being something for the good of man and then being taken for military applications and stuff. But it worked for me. It's a shame that we don't get to see the end of Trent's plot. We've got 2 books after this. And then it's 0, which will take place beforehand. So we almost certainly won't get to see his plot come to fruition, which is a shame. But I'm really glad that we at least got all this info and we have a better picture because I really was expecting him just to remain a complete mystery for the whole series from what I'd heard. So this was more information than I was expecting. Mike, how do you feel about... is it a bit of a plot dump at the end there? How do you feel about Trent in general?
Yeah, I mean, I said it was nice to finish with Trent, and hear more about his backstory and his motivation, which definitely helps. Initially, when we learn about the mysterious Trent, I felt like the character was put in to fix not plot holes, but plot devices from the games. Like, why is there a map that you have to light a fireplace to get? Maybe that's trying to fix those types of details. And hearing more about his motivation, I thought was really nice, even if it was done as expose and a thought before he falls to sleep. I would like to see more from Trent, but sadly, I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, Steve, any thoughts on the epilogue?
He's like the counter Wesker. He's more of a noble intentions for all this conspiracy and scheming. I particularly like the fact that the main heroes don't really like him and find him insufferable, but Umbrella themselves seems something like Mr. Wolf, from what's that film? The Quentin Tarantino film. There's Pulp Fiction. Yeah, Mr. Wolf from Pulp Fiction is kind of how they see him, as this fixer, this scary, intimidating man. And all the while, he's actually just a dude with a really big axe to grind. It's different. It's a shame that, much like a lot of the original characters in these books, that I would love to have seen a more canonized version of them. And yes, he works the Deus Ex Machina in pretty much every book in some way, shape, or form. But this one is literally like, this is his story. This is why he's doing this. And it's spoilers, but we're not going to get a decent conclusion by the end of Code Veronica. Just saying. Definitely worth the payoff. Although the only thing that's kind of infuriating is that all things said and done, that epilogue could have probably gone in any book. Where it's explaining his backstory.
Yeah.
Not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that it could have happened at the end of any of them. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just being picky.
It does, as I say, I feel like it does kind of read like it was written somewhat separately and just plonked in a little bit, especially because like chapter 24 is like a page long or whatever, and then it's the epilogue. It does feel like S.C. Perry was like, oh, I want to throw this in now for my own character, just in case this is it. So I don't know. Again, I'm working on assumptions there.
The Dacks, as John called them, hadn't put in an appearance or made any other sound. Just as well, John thought. Walking through a plastic forest was enough for them to handle. It was a bizarre sensation, seeing the realistic-looking trees and undergrowth, feeling the moisture in the air, but also being aware that there were no smells of earth or growing things, no wind or tiny sounds of movement, no bugs. It was a dreamlike experience, and an unnerving one. John was still edging forward, his gaze fixed on the crisscross of branches overhead, when Cole stopped. "There's kind of a clearing here," he said. Leon turned, frowning at John. "Should we skirt it?" John stepped forward, peering through the seemingly random scatter of trees to the opening ahead. It was at least 50 feet across, but John would rather they go out of their way. Being dive-bombed by a pterodactyl didn't seem like fun at all. "Yeah, Henry, veer right, we're going to." The rest of his words were lost as that high, warbling screech blasted through the unnatural forest, and a brown-grey shape dove into the clearing and flew at them, extending talons a foot across. John saw a wingspan of 8 or 10 feet, the leathery wings tipped with curved hooks. He saw a screaming, toothed beak and a slender, elongated skull. Flat, black eyes the size of saucers glittering. And bam, bam, bam! Holes punched through the thin flesh. Streamers of watery blood trickling down from the openings. The animal screamed so close that John couldn't hear the bullets, couldn't hear anything but the quavering, high-pitched shriek. And then it dropped, landing on the dark floor, pulling its wings in, and walking towards them on its elbows, like a bat, moving jerkily through the shredded trees, shrieking in short, sharp barks of sound. Behind it, another dropped into the clearing, gusting odorless wind across them as its wide wings folded close. Its long, pointed beak opening and revealing nubs of grinding teeth. This is bad, bad, bad. The lurching animal was less than 5 feet away when John drew a bead on the bobbing head and the shiny round eye and pulled the trigger.
Let's move on to talking about the writing style, the quality of the writing and stuff like that. Do that every time. I think we have a fairly good idea of what to expect from an S.T. Perry book at this point. James, you specifically pointed out the fossil killing Reston scene. Again, she's always been great at writing gore. She excels at that kind of thing, and horror, obviously, is why she got the job and why she's worked in a lot of, several horror IPs before. This book really didn't have nearly as much gore as the previous ones in it, which is kind of a shame because she's really good at it. But she's got some great turns of phrase in this book as well. One particularly that I loved really early on in the book. "As loud as the voice of an irate god," which is a brilliant, brilliant turn of phrase.
Yeah.
And the only other thing that I wanted to mention really offhand is S.T. Perry predicting Resident Evil 4 and the bingo line.
Yes!
4 years
Yeah.
before it happened on screen, entering the planet, and John says, well, Leon asks, "Where is everyone?" I think, and John says, "Maybe they're all playing bingo." Like, I had to put the book down. I was like, what?
How Hashtag Underworld is canon. Somehow.
Right, exactly. That's where Leon got that idea from. That's
That's what I was talking about, by the way, Steve. Like that thing.
Oh, right.
I was like, holy moly! Like that's the thing. That's it. Oh my god, she knew more than she did. Ah!
exactly. Also, there's a mention of which I thought was interesting, of a Les Duval. Same spelling as Morpheus Duval.
Yeah.
4 years before Dead End came out. Just probably a wonderful coincidence, but it's a very strange surname to pick for a coincidence. But yeah, some funny stuff there. Mike, you said there C. Perry's one of your favourite authors ever, so I'm just going to start with you. What do you think of her writing style and the quality of the writing in this book?
Well, you kind of already said it, where I think Perry does a really good job with gore. Unfortunately, there just wasn't a lot to capitalize on in the descriptions. Like, for example, with the spitters, they're like a skinned goat, and that's pretty much all we get outside of the sound of a snot-clogged throat being cleared. Whereas if you look at the Umbrella Conspiracy, when she first describes a zombie, it was shambling towards her. Its face was deathly pale, except for blood smeared around its rotting lips. Flaps of dried skin hung from its sunken cheeks, and on and on. So she goes into much more detail in the earlier books. I think that detracts a little bit from the ambience of each room that we go into. But otherwise, she describes things in enough detail to give us kind of a good picture of what these B.O.W.s and environments look like.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, she's I would always say that I think she's underrated, considering that. And maybe this is again from just for an outside perspective, who just sort of picks up whatever. And but as someone who's written a lot of tie-in books and adaptions, I would imagine that there's some degree of stink that comes with that, and sort of like the author and writing community, perhaps, rather than writing completely original stories. But she's certainly no hack. Absolutely, like she knows what she's doing. She's I would say definitely underappreciated. James, how did you feel of the writing in Underworld?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Like, she's so good at doing gore and like horror, and even though there was some like really weird decisions that were made, like when she actually bites into the cog of horror, like she can't let go of it. Like she just keeps going and does it so well. Like as I say, like that fossil scene, and like there's also another scene that stuck in my mind, which is with the Dax, where John like shoots into the dinner plate sized eye of one, and it's like it explodes. Like it's like, oh, it's gross. I love it. Yeah, and like with the scorps as well. But I think the biggest thing, like, if I was gonna, so I mean, we've done a lot of praising for a horror writing and stuff, but I do have a criticism, and it's gonna we're gonna go back to the spitters, because I had to actually fill in there like a little bit, because I couldn't get my head around her description for these animals. Like my brain couldn't get around it. So basically, I made these even more terrifying. I feel like even more terrifying creatures that appeared in my head. Instead of them, they'll have like goat bodies, but they had more like 90-degree kind of like spider-like legs, which kind of went up and down, like kind of skittering. Exactly. Like, and they had those like kind of like monkey like piggish faces, which was spitting, the caustic acid. Like, that made it more terrifying. The goats were not terrifying to me. Like, they were weird, right? They were just weird. But when I turned them into these, like, fleshy, spidery things, I was like, okay, no, now they're terrifying. Like, that's awful.
Yeah, I would agree with you, though. I certainly couldn't really drum up an actual image of them in my head from the description she gave. It was a little confusing.
Yeah, and it was a bit anemic as well, like at that point, because they weren't there for very long, I don't think. Even though that was a really crucial scene, that scene, it was really great. But then we got into like the hunters, and then she fell into her element again.
Yeah,
like it's she's a master at like these things just being. Were they invisible? Were they hiding in shadow? I'm not sure, because like she was.
They said chameleon.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they did. Yeah. So I was imagining that they like John and Leon because they were so stressed, they didn't realize. And yeah, now you just reminded me they were just chameleons. But oh my god, chameleon hunters! Could you make any more of a more horrifying creature more horrifying?
Well, what's even funnier about that again? That's kind of like another prediction because in Resident Evil Revelations, you have the Farfellow hunters, which do turn invisible. And again, this book predates that by like 15 years. And again, that's another thing that I have to just come back to, where she's like just actually thinking these things through. You look at Hunter, you go, okay, there's like a reptile version. What other reptile DNA would someone potentially put into this to maximize its potential in combat? Chameleons can blend it. It's brilliant. Like it's a really great choice.
Yeah, and the way she introduces them with their like, she's so good at just introducing monsters.
Mm.
Like, I mean, like bar the spitters, everything, even the scorpions were terrifying, but the hunters, that was the peak for me. Was her describing those.
Steve, thoughts on the writing style and the quality of the writing in Underworld?
See, I thought it was like pretty solid at this time. Yeah, I will concede the spitters seem to be the most confusing creature. My mental image is someone's took a Wooloo from Pokemon, made it highly realistic, and stretched its legs out, skinned its head, and now it spits potentially dangerous, but sometimes not dangerous poison. So we've all got a slightly different mental image. Poor Wooloo. As for the actual writing style, I think my main thing that I really appreciate is that every single character, when it has a main focus character, like the way that the story is written, it changes. Like you even get like as if Fossil is writing the novel, and then as if 4 pints deep Reston is writing the novel. It's that kind of stuff always draws me a bit more than say the conventional. I think it adds a bit of character to it. I think the only real issue is that there's a lot of boring or Deus Ex Machina stuff that kind of happens at the top. Again, not to go back and like wail on what happens on top side of this story, but it's just like, and then they leave in a helicopter, and then they'll rest in the desert for a bit, and then they'll manage to round up all the guys and find a lift. They made all this stuff kind of tiresome. Which is a shame, because anything underground is solid. It's fantastic. But overground wombling free, not so much.
Yeah, that's fair. Good call on the shifting in perspective. Like she managed to make it obvious very early on into each chapter which perspective it was, without it being like, now we're looking at through John's eyes. She didn't have to name the chapter after anyone or anything like that. You just figure it out. And Fossil in particular was a highlight, where it just refers to everyone as food. You could hear food over here, so it will leave this food to go and find other food. I was like, yeah, that's quite fun. Pretty morbid.
Just barrel straight. Yeah. I mean, the mental image is barreling straight from its containment straight into the city sector, and then just eats the hunters. It's like, oof. Though I think my standout phrase is when she's describing John and Leon overcoming the last Scorps, where they literally cripple them, walk over and blind them, and you can hear the face palm from Reston as he's seeing his poor creations just get completely wrecked. Okay. And then what is it? The next bit of dialogue is just watching as the two blind ones accidentally kill each other in Mortal Kombat.
Yeah. Okay, let's bring it along to characterization. We've touched upon this a little bit as we go, but any more thoughts, feel free, everyone. I'll start off the top with, at this point, David Trapp fully completes his transformation into Giles from Buffy. That's clearly what she's going for. So that's what he is in my head, and that's what he'll always be now. James, you said it earlier, just like in City of the Dead, she writes Leon's perspective wonderfully when he's sitting on the plane, especially considering his place in this kind of team of elites as just a rookie cop who got caught up in something on his first day, and that's kind of all quote unquote he is, which again feels so true to his Resident Evil 2 personality. She does a great job writing Leon throughout, and Rebecca also had another standout moment of characterization for me early on, which is as they're breaking into the facility, she really thinks about how the fact she doesn't actually want to be here. Like, she knows that what they're doing is the right thing to do, and she feels like she should do it. basically at one point she goes, maybe the codes into the facility won't work and we can all go home. Even though she knows it's the right thing to do, she'd rather not be there. I was like, that's a really cool human thing to put in there instead of, I'm just the hero and we're going to do it. Yeah. Like, actually showing that moment of sort of vulnerable thinking. Mike, standout moments of characterization and favorite and least favorite characters in this book for you?
I just think that we had too many characters in the book.
Probably true.
Like I said, Underground, I really enjoyed Cole's characterization. I thought he did the writing for him was really good for a first-time character, and unfortunately not one that will be continuing. And I just really enjoyed Reston and his pacing and his thinking and the way that we were able to kind of see his motivations behind it as well. I really enjoyed that.
Steve, any standout characters and characterization?
Yeah, Henry Cole and John, definitely. John going from someone who's overly cocky and sarcastic to actually kind of like sad and serious when Cole dies. But I was kind of dread. This is a weird thing, but like, how there's always like a moment where a character gets a bit of introspection, a bit of character development, and then they're going to die. I was kind of like, please don't do that to Henry. Please don't do that to Henry. And then like, oh no. So in the long shot side of it, probably Henry Cole, who isn't a character until the actual tests start. Not really. He's just someone that Reston was annoyed at because he was trying to do some camera and voice comms, and he wasn't doing it in the order he wanted or something. That probably poor Henry.
Yeah, that's fair. James, standout characters and moments of characterization?
Kamiya, the Japanese businessman.
And Mikami, no less. Yeah.
I mean, I love Cole so much, but John, was fantastic in this. Leon felt like a side character, and that was okay. Because he also had his moments, but John, and you know why I thought they were going to do? I thought she was going to do that typical thing where you're going to make him the hero and then he was going to fall. But right. that didn't happen, and I was so happy that it didn't, because he's so cool of a character. But Cole, oh man, that hero ending for him, and him saying that, okay, this is how it's going to end, and I'm okay with that. That's from being just this random dude in the middle of a room who was just doing wires, trying to connect up audio and cams for Reston, to turning into this hero who gave his life, to take down Umbrella, is what we like to see. And it was great, because that in its essence is what we're constantly being introduced to in Resident Evil, are characters that you wouldn't seemingly expect, other than stars and BSAA, but you wouldn't expect to be heroes, and they become heroes because of the story and because of what happens and because of the humanity that they're surrounded by. Yeah, and SD Perry captures that so great.
Yes, well said. Definitely, completely agree with that. So on the flip side, then let's talk about some beasties. Any thoughts on favourite and least favourite B.O.W.s? Obviously, we talked about it when we talked about covers, but you have to wonder, when this book came out, did the fans go, there's no zombies in this, it's not Resident Evil, in the same way they did with RE4 and with 7 and Village? But there you go. It is a little bit odd in retrospect that we don't encounter a single zombie in a Resident Evil book, but I think it's fine without, to be honest. Maybe I would have peppered them in a little bit early on, just so it wasn't no B.O.W.s up to the halfway point before we get to the DAX. But that's neither here nor there, I suppose. I think, as with the rest of these books, there's not so much you can write about combat that's not just how quickly are we going to tear through this monster. We introduce what the monster looks like and what it can do, and then they just fire at it until it's dead, usually, which is, it's fine, it is what it is. So, for example, I thought in this, the Scorps were pretty pathetic. As Steve has just described, they wind up just being blinded and killing each other. But on the other end of it, whilst the Spitters were hard to visualize, I did actually get an element of threat from them. It did feel quite tense, so that was cool. And again, hunters are hunters. They're always scary. So, Steve, standout B.O.W.s and not so much?
The Scorps for their teen killing, and it's got to be Fossil, hasn't it? My mental image is basically a dragonborn from D&D, but tyrant color scheme with maybe an exposed heart somewhere. And all it wants to do is walk and eat. But it also has clearly got some form of sapience if it has things it wants to do. The only thing that kind of makes me a bit sad is that it's probably going to get shot on the surface, and there was probably a really awesome fight with some USS guys we don't really get the end of. It just buggered off up a lift, eating a rest and snack.
Yeah.
A bit of rest and jerky, maybe a bit of alcohol in there. I mean, he was a bit of a jerk. Sorry. But yeah, no, the Dax and the Spitters, I like the idea that we can't fully grasp what a Spitter looks like. I love that. But at the same token, all they do is spit some kind of goo that apparently can be beaten by a t-shirt.
Fair point.
And the Dax just sound like, winged, airborne, annoying things.
The Resident Evil game, you got to have some kind of...
them things that pop out of people's heads in RE5, that's what I saw, but with like bat wings. So, they were all right,
Fair
I guess. Crap Scorps and fossils for me. I love that.
Do you know, actually, I do have a bit of love for how crap the Scorps were, because it's fun to see what happens when you develop a really terrible B.O.W, because Reston's like, ha ha ha, and then goes, oh. That's kind of fun.
It can repair itself, but that's about all it can do.
Pretty much. James, standout B.O.Ws for good and for bad?
Just to touch on the Scorps again, they had a really cool ability. They could heal themselves. But for some reason, Reston thought they weren't going to get hit on the head. The center point of a Scorpion, he didn't think that was where they were going to get hit. Oh, silly. Yeah, I thought the Dax weren't. The Dax weren't really a threat. Again, Reston and the person that came before him that I can't remember the name of, didn't think that, because he says they only attack in clearings. So they created a forest. Okay.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
Why did you do that? And apparently there was only a couple of clearings. It's like, oh, you silly men. You silly umbrella men. I think, clearly, the hunters are fantastic, and they terrified me, and also they killed our favorite character, right? But, my interpretation of the Spitters, really creeped me out, to the point that I had to kind of put the chapter down for a second. I need to find a picture to, reference, what I mean, right? But, the way they skittered with their goat bodies and their Evil said earlier on, they're phlegmy, bleh, when they spat, it's disgusting. But I mean, Fossil can't be beat. I love that the chapters that you gave, she gave him a chapter or them a chapter, that you got to kind of see the mind of a sentient, eating machine. And it was, it was a bit silly where it was oh, food closer, must go, food eat, when it was trying to get through to the folks in the forest world. I didn't kind of get that, because it was almost through. I mean, literally all they needed to do was kick down that door, and they were through. But yeah, it was. I want to see. I know, the Resident Evil community is going to be mad about it. But I want to see dinosaurs in Resident Evil, guys.
Resident Evil 6 kind of has a T-Rex.
Kind of. But I bring back Fossil. # bring back Fossil. We don't know where he is. The wiki describes him as having a Tyrannosaurus humanoid hybrid, just to give you guys an idea of what they look like. And that's terrifying, man. That's awful. And this thing is 10 foot tall. I think it was weighs 2 tons or something. It's terrifying. Yeah.
Basically, we need to cross over Resident Evil Dino Crisis. Officially.
Yes, please. Dino Crisis remake. Thank you very much. Yeah, standouts: Hunters, Fossil, and with my interpretation of Spitters. It goes in that order.
Fair. Mike, what do you feel about the B.O.W.s in this book?
I thought that it was another feat for Perry to be predicting the future, right? So they talk about Dax, and they describe it as being bats, right? So we see bats in Resident Evil 0, which hadn't come out at the time. We see scorpions, which was also in 0. So I thought it was really cool that she was able to kind of predict the future on a number of these different details that she had. But Fossil, yeah, it has to be the standout. I love the name that they had for it. And as it's brought up throughout the story, I keep picturing this gigantic, dinosaur tyrant that's going to be at the end of the book. And all I could picture was the big bad from Gaiden as it was walking around. But yeah, it was really cool, and I enjoyed the Fossil chapter. The last line being, let's see, what was it? Fossil wanted, Fossil was hungry. I thought it was a great primitive way to convey that message, and it just had one purpose, and that was to feed.
Mm. All right, cool. Before we get to conclusions, let's try and talk about this book, where it sits in kind of like the series. So how it feels as a sequel to Caliban Cove, which it kind of is, being the other original story. How it feels as part of the series where we're at with 4 books. And I guess how we feel knowing that this is kind of the last original story in the Perryverse. Steve, how do you feel about it in sort of context of the books that we've got so far?
When I'm told that it was originally a 4-book run, it doesn't feel like a conclusion. It doesn't feel very conclusive at all. But which is, it's nice we get some backstory on its central new character, and that's solid. The adventure itself, one half is really fun and kind of great. The other half is kind of dreary, which is a shame because the characters involved in it, I really like Claire Redfield. I really like Rebecca Chambers. Hell, David Trapp's a bit of all right, and they're kind of not fun. They're kind of boring, which is a shame. But in the same way that David was like the principal of the original characters in Caliban Cove, John is this time. So it's fine. Give them the kind of limelight that they didn't get in the previous novel.
Yeah, that's fair.
As for where we're headed, I call me cynical, but I feel like because of the nature of retcons that are going to have to come in for Nemesis and Code Veronica, we're going to have a less fun time as a result.
Interesting. Yeah, it is a shame that we won't get conclusions. I'm going to have to assume that this is it for John and David, appearance-wise. I haven't read the Nemesis adaptation, and I haven't read the Code Veronica adaptation in a long time. I don't think they're randomly inserted into those from what I know, but who knows? But it's a shame that's kind of...
I mean, if they are great, but I don't expect them to be.
Right, that's exactly it. I don't expect them to be, which is a shame because I would like to see a conclusion for those characters, and to a certain degree, Trent. Like, I could probably live without it. I like that we've got the knowledge of who he is, but yeah, it is a shame, isn't it?
Yeah. To sum it up, then, Underworld's a pretty good novel. Doesn't feel like the conclusion. It feels like a nice middle of the road adventure with, unfortunately, a bit of fluff on top.
James, how do you feel about Underworld, where it sits in the series at this point, and I suppose your conclusion as well?
Well, knowing this might be like the last chance we see John and David, it kind of it's bittersweet. Kind of makes me sad, especially since like the story's there. They have 1 book. There are 2 more books to get. The progression is there. They could go and do it, but I mean, we probably won't get that, or somebody else will pick up that baton. I know I've not spoken about the top half, what the surface level stuff at all, but to be honest, it was unforgettable. Claire was not Claire Redfield in my opinion. She was just a throwaway character. It was cool. David was pretty much the key player, and since we know what Rebecca are capable of, it was kind of upsetting to see that. But the rest of the book was fantastic. I loved Steve said earlier on, it was full of comedy because John was the comedy. He brought it together. He was that glue. But also seriousness and great horror writing and gore writing. And if I was gonna, as a conclusion, if I was gonna give it a rating, I think the lab stuff really carries it quite hard, and I think it's probably my favorite book because of that. Out of the ones I've read, because I just love the human interaction so much, and I also love the beginning. I really did love the beginning. Seeing another thing I wanted to mention is Rebecca like being a little bit sassy, which was nice to see. Like towards John, like her saying, like I can't swear, but you know, she says to John that she wants, don't fall or something. I don't want to pick you, up again or something like that. And it's like it was so funny because John like you got immediately with that interaction, you got who John was.
Mm.
And who Rebecca was and what their relationship was. But do we ever see that grow? No, we don't. And I wanted it to.
Yeah, it's a shame. It really is.
Yeah, but it's
sorry, go on.
Sorry, yeah. Just conclusion. Yeah, it's a great book, and anyone should read it. Like if you're a Resident Evil fan, you should read it. It's got no zombies in it, but I don't think that is a huge dip for the book.
I think that if someone were to jump in here, they might maybe struggle with a little bit of the pacing, which I think was a problem with Caliban Cove from what I remember as well, is that it does take a while before it might potentially completely grip you. At the beginning is good, but it does lull for a while for me. But as you say, when we get to the lab, I haven't really said this before, I thought the idea of the planet, this underground sort of artificial forest and all that stuff it's fine. Like, it's been done. It's pretty simple. But the way that it's written is quite fun and engaging, as you said. I thought maybe that I was always going to gravitate towards the adaptions because, I've got a fondness for the stories that are being adapted, of course. And I think I would really love to give all 4 of these books to someone who knows nothing about Resident Evil. Have them read them all and then say, pick the 2 which you think are based on video games and the 2 that aren't. Because I think the structures of Caliban Cove and Underworld feel very different to the other 2. Not that that's a bad thing, I just think they stand out very differently. So it's nice to have that variation. And I think I wouldn't say this is quite at the top, but after talking about it with you guys, it's actually thinking about it, I think it is better than I gave it credit for. It's definitely up there. Yeah, it's enjoyable. It's unfortunate that it doesn't quite reach a full conclusion with some of these characters and some of the plot strands that are in it, unfortunately. But as a standalone thing, it's good fun. Mike, what are your final thoughts on Resident Evil Underworld and sort of where it belongs as part of the Perryverse?
Well, I had read the book when it first came out, so that was 21 years ago, and I remember absolutely loving it. And what I completely forgot about was everything that happened on the surface. Like, so when I just reread this in December, I was like, oh my gosh, there's way more happening up here. Well, not really. There's more of the book dedicated to that that I had just completely forgot about. But the lab section, the underground part is just so good. And that's what I remember loving about the book. So this is definitely one of the better ones. If I were going to give it a rating, maybe 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Cool. Well, nothing else remains for me but to thank our contributors, our patrons, and our listeners. Join the First Aid Spray Discord server to become part of our community and hear the show early and unedited. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and more. All of these links and all of our content can be found at faspraypod.com. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, and all good podcasting apps. And if you like what you hear, please do leave us a review where you can and spread the good word. Don't forget you can support the show by picking up some merch or at patreon.com/faspraypod for as little as $1 a month. On our next episode, we focus on one of the series' most beloved and most missed characters as we look at the career of the super cop and master of unlocking. Its profile, Jill Valentine. Thank you to the panel. You can follow all the Pueblo people individually. I'm at Saniac_123. Steve is at FB Steve Was Taken. James is at Moist Owler OFF. And Mike is at Evil Deadites. And finally, thank you for listening and have a good week.
I want a go. Like I don't want one of the big old
goat. You want a pygmy goat?
I don't want a pygmy goat. I want just the smaller version. I want the 1.5.
The one that was scrapped before it came out, and then they went back.
I know someone
Someone has to do it, didn't they? You're gonna call it Elsa, yeah?
There it is.
Sorry, I'll stop.